Morning.
Good morning.
You are juror number 4, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. The court reporter is going to love the fact that you have a nice loud voice.
Awesome.
So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes, sir.
All right. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire and submitted it to the court. Thank you for taking the time to do that. Is there anything on there that you want to change or add to? Because sometimes people fill out the questionnaire and they realize, I should have talked about this, or that wasn't quite accurate. Doesn't get you into trouble.
It's been about a couple of months. My memory's not too refreshed with it. I did fill it out to the best of my knowledge at that time.
Okay.
Would I be able to glance over it one time?
Well, actually, I think the lawyers will kind of draw out things.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to, go over it with them.
Okay. And they'll be asking you some questions, I'm sure. A couple things is you have some exposure to the facts of this case, as I think is true of everyone.
Yes, sir. It was a national thing.
Yeah, and since you got your questionnaire, which said from now on avoid any media coverage, have you been exposed to any media coverage? Because sometimes it can happen inadvertently, like you see a headline or a friend says, "Oh, did you hear about A, B, and C?" Kind of a spoiler alert.
Pretty much besides what you guys sent me saying that I'd be doing my civic duty here. No, I really don't follow it. The only things I've been seeing is just COVID related stuff. If I do see any news outlets or anything. I work pretty much day and night, so I just keep busy with that.
Okay, fair enough. Now, you have some knowledge of the case, but if you are on the jury, you have to decide the case just on the information you hear that's admitted into evidence. And you have to kind of put aside anything you've heard outside the courtroom or might even hear outside the courtroom going forward. You have to kind of put that aside, not kind of, you do have to put it aside.
Yes, sir.
Just decide the case on the facts you hear here and apply the law that I give you.
Yes, sir.
Do you think you could do that?
Yes, sir.
In doing that, you have to be fair and impartial, which means
stick to the facts.
Stick to the facts and not lean one way or the other.
Yes,
do you think
sir.
you could do that? Okay. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list that we gave you?
No, sir. I'm originally from Southern California. I moved here about 3 years ago, and I'm not too familiar with anybody in this area.
So you moved from Southern California to Minnesota?
Yes, sir, unfortunately.
I mean, did we sneak it in by having you move in the summer and not in the winter?
No, I moved in November. I came here in October, and yeah, it was a warm welcoming, to say the least.
Right. Okay, now there were some answers in your questionnaire about, I think, maybe the length of time. If you are on this jury, you would be free to go about your business until March 29th, and then it would probably be 4 weeks of trial that you would have to attend, and then obviously deliberations. And there were some, I think, maybe some work concerns you expressed.
Yes, I do have some work concerns, but if they feel that I'm the best fit for this case, I would be more than interested in doing my duty.
Okay. You think you could resolve any work difficulties and serve on this case?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. All right. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to turn it over to the attorneys, but with a couple of cautions. When we start talking like this and with the attorneys, it gets conversational, and sometimes we talk over each other, or we use mm-hmm. Let's try and stick to yes and no, because the court reporter needs to take down exactly what we're saying, and also try and avoid talking over each other.
Yes, sir.
And to be honest, not these lawyers, but historically, it's the lawyers who tend to violate that and start talking over you. These lawyers have been very good about not doing that, but try not to talk over each other so that we have a good record of what we're doing today.
Good deal.
Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
And I think you can pull your mask down if you'd like
Awesome.
to be able to answer the questions, because we do have the plexiglass, and I'll keep my mask on. So with that, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. I apologize for coming up to the podium a little early. I should say good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. How about yourself?
I'm well, thank you. A little busy, but I'm well.
Likewise.
So here's what I'd like to do is I just kind of want to ask you some pretty general questions first, get to know you a little bit, and then I'm going to follow up with some questions about some of the answers you gave on your questionnaire. And I understand you haven't seen it or read it in a while, I'll refresh your recollection as we go through that, okay?
Yes, sir.
Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay. So let's assume, sir, that you and I met in some social circumstance, a party, whatever. What would be 2 or 3 things you would want me to know about you after I walked away?
Just, the good nature and just, pretty much I'd want you to know I'm a good person and just fun, outgoing, and I mean well. That's
Good.
pretty much it,
Yeah, you seem like an outgoing guy. Do you have any particular interests, hobbies, things you do in your spare time?
I follow sports briefly. Really, just work's been my main go-to. I was doing some kickboxing in Minneapolis for a little while, but lately work's been so hectic that I haven't done that. But other than that, no, not really. I haven't been the best at adapting to Minnesota yet.
I understand. Without divulging any personal information, as far as family members or names or anything, was there something particular that brought you here to Minnesota from Southern California?
To chase more opportunity. I was from a small town in Southern California, and Minnesota was referenced as a place where I could better my situation, so I came out here to chase the Minnesota dream of bettering my situation and making something of myself.
Okay, wonderful.
It's working so far.
Working so far.
So far,
All
so
right.
good.
Good. So you got a packet in the mail advising you that you were going to be coming in for jury service.
Yes, sir.
When you opened that packet, what was your just initial reaction? And whatever it is, just let us know.
It was a little bit of kind of a shock, just moving here recently, like I was saying, wow, out of all the people, me, kind of
Right.
like, wow, okay. So I just started glancing over it and stuff and just seeing, what I was getting myself into, I guess you could say.
Right. Well, obviously, you learned that you were being summoned in a high-profile case.
I read that there was the potential of it, but I was like, the likelihood of me getting chosen for that, I didn't think it would be me, or
Sure.
I'd make it to this point.
Okay. But you got a questionnaire that you filled out, and it was obviously about this case.
Yes, sir.
And before you filled out that questionnaire, you were aware of what happened in the case.
Yes, I was aware of it.
Right. And I'm assuming that's from media coverage.
Just the media coverage, what was going on in the media and what had taken place after the, kind of the butterfly effect, you could say.
Sure. I just want to look at one thing here. Okay. So once you kind of read over that questionnaire and started, thinking about the possibility that you could be here today, what was your reaction? Did it change?
It changed a little bit. I think things got more serious for me. And then once I was filling it up to the best of my knowledge, I was just trying to be as unbiased as possible and just, give it direct, straightforward answers on how I feel or my experience with the questions that were asked in the documents.
Okay. All right. Can you think of a situation, whether it be in your personal life or your professional life, where you have been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Like you were saying earlier with social activities, guys getting into it with each other and stuff, sometimes you just try to de-escalate it, break it up, or, just make sure it doesn't get to the point where, there's no going back, I guess you could say, or do something you might regret.
Sure. So let me expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You would agree that not all disagreements necessarily become physical in their nature?
Not all disagreements do need to become physical, but in a situation where defense becomes your only way out, I do believe in self-defense.
Sure. I guess what I'm asking is, have you ever just simply, two friends are having an argument?
Yeah.
And it's not physical, it's, what's the best color, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
whatever, right? Insert any mundane detail. And they're arguing about it, right?
Yes.
And they turn to you and they say, juror number 4, although they wouldn't call you juror number 4, they'd say, what do you think? How do we resolve this dispute between you? Can you think of a situation like that?
Well, I'd give him my personal opinion, and I guess if it's three's the number, if it's a 2-to-1 deal, or if my opinion's different than theirs, then now all three of us are in disagreement.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, not every time you're going to come to a solid agreement in a situation.
All right. I'm going to come back to that in just a second here.
Yes,
then.
sir.
But how about a situation where you've got two friends that are describing, or two people you know, or two acquaintances, and they're describing a certain situation. And person number one is saying, this is what happened. And person number two is saying, no, that's not what happened. This is what has happened. How do you determine which of those two people is telling the truth?
It would depend who could back up their rebuttal with facts.
Okay.
I stick to the facts, and if they could back that up with facts and proof, there's proof in the pudding. By all means, then their argument's going to be a lot stronger, in my opinion, than the guy who's just sticking to his opinion.
Okay. Do you think that there are certain things or certain, I guess, tools, so to speak, that you can apply to that analysis to determine if they're, let's assume it's a situation where it's not on videotape, or it's not, there's no hard evidence, right? How do you resolve that dispute between two people? It gets more difficult, right?
It does get more difficult when there's no evidence and you're just kind of taking the good word of somebody. I guess character comes into play, and if you have any previous experience with that person, there's that old saying, a spade's a spade. If the guy's a liar, he lies 10 out of 10 times, He might just lie to you again.
Right.
And you'd be naive to think otherwise, I think.
Sure. And so let me just, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I get
No,
this is awkward. But,
yeah.
So as I understand what you're saying is you have a dispute that you're trying to resolve. You're going to look first for, facts and evidence, right? And if those facts and evidence don't exist, you're going to kind of go on your experience and with the person's character.
With the person's character, and if it's quite obvious, the guy's telling me the sky's blue, it's a little bit more believable than a guy telling me, it's red or something,
Okay.
Or just, it just kind of all depends on the situation and the, scenario.
Right. So there are certain things that you can see for yourself.
Absolutely.
And you can make a determination based on that, right?
Yes, I have the ability to think for myself.
Right. Sky's blue.
Sky's blue.
Right. Okay. You understand that in this scenario, it's not a 2-to-1, it's not a 10-to-2, it's a unanimous decision that has to be made one way or another. You understand that?
Yes.
Okay. And what if you found yourself in a situation where you were the odd man out? You were the only person, right, that disagreed with the rest of the group. How do you deal with that?
I stick to my guns, and just saying, I'm going to stick to what I believe is right,
Okay.
In my heart and what I feel, and that's what I'm going to go with.
Okay. And so if you were in that situation, would you be willing to listen to what the other people are saying?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Would you be willing to re-examine your personal opinions?
Definitely. I mean, yeah, I'm always open ears, and willing to, look at something again,
Okay.
It's like that saying, measure twice, cut once.
What if you have to measure 10 times?
Measure 10 times,
What about 100 times?
measure 100 times, get it right the first time.
Okay. Can you think of a situation, again, in your personal or professional life where you were just 100% convinced of something, and then later it turns out you were wrong?
I think if I could have a moment to just think.
Yeah, take your time.
I can't think of an exact moment, but there has been times in life where I've made a judgment and I was wrong, based on facts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that, I mean, that's an honest answer, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, that occurs in day-to-day life, sometimes you're not always going to be right.
Right, okay. And are you able to acknowledge when you're not right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, follow-ups on your questionnaire, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
All right, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit, and you referenced it in your, in an earlier answer you gave me too. You have some training in the martial arts, kickboxing?
Yes, sir, I've done a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've done some Muay Thai, some striking.
Okay. And how long have you practiced that?
I did it for about a year, mostly of the striking. Did some Jiu-Jitsu for about 2 months.
Okay. And did you achieve a certain level?
I was about one test away from getting my green sash. I was orange sash in Muay Thai. And then with the whole COVID thing that happened, when it took like full effect towards January or so, I became full-blown to working instead of attending the gym, and I just never went back to accomplish that.
Okay. Is it something you want to go back to?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good hobby, and I enjoy it.
Okay. So, reflecting back to an earlier question, the questionnaire asks you what you had heard or knew about the facts of this particular case. And something in your response struck me is you said the cop performed an illegal tactic with his knee across the neck.
Yes, in the video it looks like his knee is a little high. So with that being said, isn't the tactic supposed to be knee across like the shoulder blades?
So that's obviously one of the things that we're going to be discussing throughout the course of the trial, right?
Yes, sir.
So, but you used an interesting word in your response, which was an illegal move, right? What standard would you be applying in terms of the legality of a move?
Well, I guess the black and white fine print of, I guess, what they, to my knowledge, what would be in their, well, I don't want to call it a handbook or their training.
Okay.
From what I was just seeing in the news and stuff, and then just seeing, the video from the angle that was showed on the news, it does look a little rough, in my opinion.
Okay, and I appreciate your honesty, okay? So I guess my question is that you will hear evidence, if you are seated on this jury, you will hear evidence from people in the Minneapolis Police Department about their training and their train their officers. That may be different from your personal training.
Oh yeah, if they could educate me on what the fine print is in a situation like that, I'd be open ears to hearing that, and I would feel more educated myself, and that might change my opinion on what occurred that day.
Okay. So I want to make sure that what you would apply would be the Minneapolis Police Department's standards versus your personal experience being trained in jiu-jitsu. You would do that?
I would do that.
Okay. You said in your response that it may change your opinion of what happened. It's fair to say you formed an opinion of what happened here in this case.
There is a little bit of opinion. I believe it could have been handled differently. I believe the outcome could have happened a lot more. There could have been a different outcome, in my opinion.
Okay. The questionnaire asks for your perspective on Mr. Chauvin, and you indicated it was a very negative opinion.
I would say what I've seen, yes, I formed I wouldn't say very negative, but I would say the way he handled that situation struck me as very negative.
Okay.
But like I said, if I'm, more evidence and I'm educated more on the situation, I would feel better myself too about the opinion I'm creating of him, because I know nothing about this man.
Okay. Well, what you wrote in your questionnaire, and I understand I'm not trying to trick you, but what you wrote in what your questionnaire is that they took the law into their own hands.
Well, yeah, if a guy's, sitting there telling you can't breathe and, you decide, a man ultimately lost his life that day. And so earlier I was hearing that you have the right to, a trial and stuff. He didn't make his, court date.
Okay.
His fate was decided on the street that day, unfortunately, due to either, the certain circumstances. I'm not too sure of the evidence and everything, but, ultimately his fate was decided that day.
So you formed an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of Mr. Chauvin at this point?
No.
Okay. And you're telling us that you're willing to examine all of the evidence in this case, right?
I think I feel a lot better about the whole situation if I was to examine more evidence and become more educated on the situation, because as of right now, I do have sort of a negative opinion on what happened that day. But like you said, there's going to be times in life where you are wrong, and some, you face the music, and I'd be,
So if after reviewing all of the evidence, you formed the opinion that what happened that day was not a crime, you could vote not guilty?
If the facts, the evidence show that what he did that day was proper policing, and there was other circumstances that caused that fatal incident, and there's other things that tied into it, and that was the sole reason that that man lost his life on the street that day, and the evidence backs and supports it, I'd be willing to support what's right at the end of the day. But, if it's wasted the other way, and the evidence shows that there was improper policing, and that was the sole reason that he didn't see his court date, what's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong.
Okay. One of the questions in the questionnaire asks you about whether you believe that this incident has had a positive or negative effect on the community.
From what I've seen in the media coverage and talking to people who've lived here for many years, I wouldn't say the issue that happened had a very negative effect on the community itself. Some people might have had their own agendas tied to, the whole movement that did occur, but it definitely didn't help with the community.
Okay. You also indicated that you have previously seen police engaged in activity that would be more force than needed. And you wrote, I have seen officers be very aggressive. They can be verbally abusive.
Yes.
Can you explain or tell us what you saw?
Well, even growing up as a younger kid, I've seen officers, get verbally aggressive and stuff, and just be a little bit more forceful than they should, But that's not every officer, at the end of the day, each individual is their own individual, but,
Okay. So can you give me a specific example of what you've seen?
Well, when I was younger, I've had some run-ins with cops, and they weren't too nice to us, they thought of us as punk teenagers, so I've had a couple incidents, but that was in Southern California, but, just a couple verbal exchanges and stuff, Okay.
And do you have a general perception of police in general?
Well, I think there's good cops, and, to say that there isn't bad cops, that would be a very, I think there's good and bad, There's some people who abuse their authority, and there's some people who, use their authority for the better, and,
Do you have an opinion of the Minneapolis Police Department specifically?
No, not really. I've never dealt with them, so no, not really.
So none of these previous experiences involved the Minneapolis Police Department?
No, sir.
There were some questions about your overall views on the system and how the system treats people. Do you recall generally those questions?
Not necessarily, I don't recall, but I know that the system is flawed, in my opinion, you know.
Explain why you think that?
Well, I think, you know, sometimes the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and sometimes, you know, I just feel like it's a broken system, you know. When prisons went private, they became their own private, you know, entity and stuff, and they started profiting off people being incarcerated. I believe it, you know, broke the system a little bit.
Okay. Your Honor, could we have a brief sidebar about something unrelated?
We approach the bench now by doing it over
Okay.
wireless, so
Understandable, I'm new to the whole process.
we're new to this kind of COVID process ourselves. You may.
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, one last question. Are you familiar with the Northside Boxing Gym?
No, sir, I've never partaked in the Northside Boxing Gym.
Okay. Your Honor, I have no further questions, but I am exercising a peremptory.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, let me make a record.
Oh, all right, hold on. from service on this jury, so
Perfect.
what I'd like you to do is make sure you take your mask, and the deputy will escort you out and take whatever materials we need from you. So thank you for your
Okay.
candid answers.
Thank you.
No, we're gonna make it record, yeah. All right, juror number 4 has left. Let's make a record. Mr. Slisher, defense indicated they wanted to do a peremptory and the state mounted a Batson challenge.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Yes, for the record, the defense has made its peremptory challenge now on its second person of color in the jury pool, and the state has raised a Batson challenge. And it's clear from the record that the juror number 4, identifies himself, self-identifies as Hispanic, as did first juror that was struck by the defense. And when asked to provide a race-neutral explanation for the exercise of the peremptory, the defense, and I'll let them speak for themselves, but articulated just sort of a generalized concern that this particular prospective juror expressed strong opinions and believed and articulated a belief that he was simply trying to get on the jury. But there's really no objective evidence of that. There's nothing in what the prospective juror said that would support a conclusion that he held strong beliefs. I believe that the juror said exactly the opposite, and that whatever beliefs or opinions he may have had, he was unequivocally willing to set those opinions aside and judge the case based solely on the evidence, or in his words, on the black and white. And further, expressing the opinion that he would have no problem setting those beliefs aside and deciding the case based on the facts and the evidence and the law. Now, I draw the parallel between juror number 4, who's Hispanic, and juror number 2, who's self-identified as Caucasian or white. Their answers with respect to these questions that were raised by defense counsel are markedly similar, if not the same. And the characteristics are very much the same too. Both expressed a belief that they would decide a case based on the facts and on the evidence. Both described experiences in which they believed they were subjected to some aggressive police conduct when they were younger, but one results in a preemptory strike and the other does not. I understand that the motion from the court has been denied, but I do persist in the challenge.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, first and foremost, the law requires me to state a race-neutral reason for striking this particular juror. I disagree that the juror did not articulate strongly held opinions. He specifically referenced in his questionnaire illegality of certain moves, certain tactics. He stated that he had formed the opinion that these officers had taken the law into their own hands, and that he had formed opinions about what had happened. Yes, this juror indicated that he was willing to re-examine those opinions, but only upon essentially providing him evidence and proof contrary to his opinions, is the way I understood him to say that. I think the difference between this particular juror and the prior juror is that the prior juror had not watched the video. He had limited his intentional exposure. He came at it from a very analytical perspective in terms of science and things of that nature. He had no preconceived opinions whatsoever. That's a significant difference between these jurors. The second reason, Your Honor, is that this juror has a specific training, and I was concerned in part that his training or his belief that in martial arts training that this was an illegal move was concerning, and it struck me as insincere. His statements that he would be willing to re-examine the evidence struck me as insincere.
As far as the Batson factors, the fact that these are two Hispanic jurors who were struck, I think, establishes at least a prima facie case to go forward. But at the same time, the defense has provided a race-neutral reason for its strike. I disagree with the state. These two jurors, number 4 and number 2, are not the same in how they approached. I think Mr. Nelson established how juror number 2 was much more scientific, more not involved in the case. I'll be honest, at one point in in the voir dire, I realized the defense would probably strike him. That reason was not because of his race, but because when he was talking about his jiu-jitsu experience and his experience with a hold, is that he obviously might stick to his own opinions about being essentially an expert in the jury room, but more importantly, he stated it in a way that made it clear that he was going to stick to his opinion until somebody else told him otherwise or provided proof otherwise, which essentially is shifting the burden onto the defense and not coming in with the presumption of innocence. And so as soon as he stated in that terms that this was improper policing, this is my opinion, but if you can tell me otherwise, that's not the presumption of innocence. That's holding on to an opinion. And so it may not be for cause, but I think it is appropriate and a race-neutral reason for striking the juror. So anything further to add to the record from the state or from the defense?
Your Honor, respecting the court's ruling, I would just simply caution that in terms of strikes for specialized knowledge, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically, that will result in striking a disproportionate number of Hispanic people who would be more inclined to train in that particular discipline than other types of martial arts.
It's not that, and I didn't say that. It's not specifically that he has jiu-jitsu training. It's whether or not he would be the expert and whether he has an opinion that he is not willing to put aside. What I heard him say is he has the opinion, he's going to carry it into the courtroom, and you have to essentially convince him otherwise. That's not the presumption of innocence. That's not putting aside your opinion in your training. If he had come in and said, yeah, I know this is one thing, but I'm willing to listen to what the evidence is and decide on the evidence, not on what my personal opinion is. I think it's a fine distinction, but an important one. So accordingly, I'm not sure that's even true, but I'll accept your word that such training would impact people of Hispanic background. So that's a new fact for me.
Thank you, Your Honor. I
right.
understand the court's ruling.
All right, let's do our next juror, please. Number 5. Or what number is it?
8.
8.